Now, I have to admit, some of these topics I get in terms of patron-suggested topics confuse the life out of me. They honestly do. I was sitting there looking at this going, well, I can do this. I can do this because it's just a simple extraction analysis and basically amphibious force structure, so yeah, I can work this out, but it's how realistic are the logistics and leadership challenges of the refugee fleet in Battlestar Galactica? And, well, I'm going to give you the answer in the first 60 seconds. No! Okay, theoretically, if they had... They don't have Star Trek replicators in this scenario. They don't. They are growing their food, they have agro ships, etc., and all these things, and they have sanitation sewage ships. They have all sorts of things. Honestly, I don't know how sanitation and sewage ship come to existence. I really don't. There are reasons you could have them, but honestly, most of the time you just have some form of incinerator in space, I presume. Rather than carriers once you're into that level. But, you know, hey-ho, they've got them, and they probably do need them, because, let's be honest, what we're going to be talking about is massive. Now, this is not going to be a long video. It really isn't, because it's the scale you're talking about, honestly, right? Now, you have to remember, the average journey is about 4-something plus years in space that we're talking about for this mission. Usually when we're talking about for ships, we're talking days, weeks, months. Very rarely a full year for a massive crew, and certainly not a crew which is not of a, how do I put this politely, a naval orientation or specialist orientation. It is very rare otherwise. And so, you start working out these things. Well, you know, you could say, okay, let's work it out on 2,000 calories depending per day. I could work it on that level, but there are some people who are going to be sitting around not doing much, and there are going to be some people who are doing heavy-duty work in the engineering systems, in the various Viper squadrons, or in terms of the ground forces and etc., and their personnel and how they're being trained and equipped and what they're doing. So there are going to be people using a fairly hefty amount of calories a day. And whilst, yes, we do have 39,500 by the end, at the beginning you have roughly 50,000, and, well, it doesn't make life much better if you lose roughly 10,500. It really... It reduces your needs by roughly a fifth, which is not a lot. For example, when we're talking about for 50,000 people calories per day, it's 150 million, roughly. 150 million calories per day of food. Now, just remember, a slice of bacon is about 50 calories. So, you are talking about 3 million slices of bacon per day. 3 million slices of bacon per day. Per month, it's a little over 4.5 billion calories required. Per year, it's quite near to 55 billion calories per year. So that's the amount of food you've got to supply and process, and no system which is going to be creating food, especially if you are moving food from an agro ship, which we'll be talking about in a second, to a liner, which most of these ships are liners, so they are made for relatively, well, how to put it, nice journeys, but not massively long journeys, and there are freighters as well. That's just you're gonna be moving stuff around, and moving stuff around is going to lead to wastage. So you are going to be having to produce probably somewhere in the region of 60 billion worth of calories per year. Why am I saying that? Because at every step of the way you're going to lose some of those calories. Every step of the way you're going to lose some of those calories. And the fact is, whilst I've done it as an average of 3,000 calories per individual per day, again, that's me putting in an average. When you consider the scenario these people are in, the stress they're in, that's going to add to their consumption. It is. Food riots are going to be a fairly common thing. Food riots, because if you do not have much in these ships in terms of slack supply, you can't keep, let's say, constantly keep a 2-week surplus of food on a ship and be stocking it up. Every time it gets down to 2 weeks worth of food, you'd run a stock line. You don't have the facilities to do that. You don't have the ships you need to do that. You need to dedicate pretty much all your shuttles to moving food around to be able to do that. And even for other things. Which means there are going to be times when something's going to go wrong, where the minimum number of shuttles you have to supply it is going to not be enough, and you're going to have a shortage and you're going to have issues. Drinking water. Please note, drinking water. Not including water for washing, for cleaning, for all the other things you use water for. Just drinking. 2.5 to 4 litres a day, again, depending upon activity. And this is something you have to think about, because so often when we're talking about this, and I've seen some videos about this, looking at this, they're using what I would call, these are the bare necessities for a human to live. If they are doing nothing other than existing, this is enough calories for them not to lose weight, this is enough water for them to be fine. But we're talking about a fleet going through space, keeping ships going which are in some regards falling apart, trying to make ships do things and work above and beyond capacity which they normally have done. We're talking about all the organisation, all the things going on here. By the way, the fact that there's 50,000 people, 39,500 people, that's probably just about enough to make this work. Because whilst, yes, you might be going, well, hang on, there are lots of people sitting on the liners who are probably doing nothing extra. Possibly they are doing nothing extra. But the reality is there's probably going to be stuff found for them to do quite quickly. Every single ship is going to have to be processed into providing something for the fleet beyond above just existing. No one's going to get a free ride on a fancy car. They're going to have to be working. Because you are now talking about your fleet is also your logistical train. It's all your logistics, all your infrastructure, everything is coming from within that fleet. Everyone's going to have to learn how to be useful. Yeah, but basing it on, therefore, an average of 3.25 litres per day, per person, that's 162,500 litres a day for drinking. Which, by the way, does build up to very nearly 60 million litres of water a year for drinking for those 50,000. And let's be honest, again, that's just drinking. You are probably talking about a consumption in excess of 7 times that, once you include washing, cleaning, all those things. Especially for this kind of situation, this kind of scenario. Because again, think about food transport. You're going to need to clean the shuttles after each transport. Prevent cross-contamination. See, the more stuff you're actually doing to actually survive, the more mess you're going to make, the more you're going to need to clean. The more water you're going to need to use. And then there's going to be the water you're going to lose in coolant, the water you're going to lose in leakage, the water you're going to lose in transportation. Oxygen. That's also a fun thing, because humans are incredibly inefficient at taking in oxygen out of the air. Incredibly inefficient. We need to shift through roughly 378 to 550 litres of oxygen a day out of all the air we breathe in, depending on activity. Yay! That's a mere 8.5 billion litres of oxygen, on average, required. And that's before we get into the whole thing of battle damage, damage due to leaks, the natural wastage of oxygen, the fact you're going to have to reprocess it. Yeah, that's going to be fun. And you're also going to scrub all the carbon dioxide we produce from the air. I could have added that up there with the feces and the urine, but frankly, I thought I was being depressing enough. Feces, that's a mere... Well, let's be honest. It says 2.7 billion. It says 2.7 billion, but let's be honest, that's probably going to be roughly 3 billion if you have a weekly curry night. That's going to definitely be about 3 billion if there's a weekly curry night going on. Okay? I'm not saying anything bad about curry here. I'm just saying its effects on most digestive systems are well known. It's a cleanser. And so I'm putting it that's probably closer to 3 billion, ton of 3 billion grams, which is 3,000 tons of feces alone a year to deal with. And I think that's a little light. I think that is a little light. I was considering that for a while. The average apparently a human expels every day, including moisture expelled in it, is 150 grams. But, you know... Again, pizza night, curry night, I'm sure I can do. I have done more personally, so I think that's a little light. I really do. That's not me bragging or anything, that's just me thinking about how much 150 grams is and thinking, well, you know... Now, then there's urine. In my case, people are, you know, I would be drinking a lot of iron brew as well as water, but still gonna mean I'm gonna have, what goes in has to go out somewhere, and, of course... Not all goes out that way. Some comes out due to sweat. Some comes out through your, well, poo. And some comes out through you peeing it. And that's all got to be processed. But do beware. Turning urine into water is... It's going to help somewhat if you can do a one-to-one conversion. It's going to taste funny from personal experience, but you can do it. There are some machines and systems which can turn urine into water. Tastes funny though. But let's say you're going to need more than that. And you're going to be having to run as much of a closed loop as you can on water, but ideally, you're going to find asteroids and things to mine, and you're going to have to mine them. Believe it or not, water is actually something you can get hold of in space, if you know where to look and have the proper equipment. Soil, though, soil's going to be more interesting. Admittedly, thanks to something here, and apparently the Martian, you have got a potential solution for some of your issues when it comes to fertilizer for your crops. But you're still going to need some soil. And you're going to need ships which are actually designed to grow them. And yeah, that's gonna be a fun thing. You see, the ships they're doing with this with, that's the part which really worries me. You see, it'd be one thing doing this with a force of specially built warships. Warships which are designed for long distance operations, multi-year trips out. You know, I might be annoyed with Star Trek on a regular basis because they have these 5-year voyages, but at least they have replicators which do, to an extent, make it make sense in terms of food supply. To an extent. Battlestar Galactica. In the original series, there are 3. Later, just 1 aggro ship 9. There's also at least 1 livestock ship and 1 sanitation ship. In the more recent series, there were about 2, it seems to be. There's a whole debate as to how many aggro ships there were, and whether or not they had a livestock ship. The sanitation ship is a fun one to have. In the new series, Demetrius, a sewage recycling ship, is actually sent off on a mission. This is something which I found amazing. Okay, you've got sewage recycling ships, which suggests your ships don't all have the ability to do sewage recycling, at least not on the level you need. Okay, maybe this vessel existed, probably to get stuff off asteroid mines and other vessels, or maybe things which are long-term miners, like asteroid miners or something. And so that means that ship is going to be pretty darn critical infrastructure, unless you have multiple of them, which I don't think they necessarily have. And they send that off. They send that off. They also have a botanical cruiser, a liner-type vessel of unknown name, but it looks like this. It's got pods, which you could turn into potentially more agricultural production. But it's going to be interesting to do. It's going to be really interesting to do. I'm still getting out the fact I sent off Demetrius. All the ships I wouldn't send off on a solo mission, the one that looks after the poo. Why? Seriously, the ships which are your infrastructure and logistics, you do not send off. You find a long-range shuttlecraft, you find something. You don't send off something like that. That's useful. Unless you've got a lot of them, and I would be highly surprised if they have a lot of anything. Now, the original series, they start off with a fleet of roughly 200 ships. Roughly 200. And that, if we're talking about 50,000 people, makes a lot of sense, because, well, not all those ships are going to be able to carry people. Let's say about half of them can actually carry people. The rest are going to be freighters. So the other half can carry a very few amount of, can carry more people than the other thing. But so let's say you would have a tenth of your people on 100 ships, so about 5,000 people stripped around the 100 freighters or so, with roughly a crew of 50 each. Makes about sense. That means the other 45,000 are on roughly 100 ships, which means each of those ships would be taking roughly 450. Now, some of those are going to be very small ships, some of those are going to be very big ships, and some of those are going to be packed to the gulls with more. And we know some ships had thousands aboard. And the thing is, most of those ships don't have systems which are designed for long-term operation. They're designed to be doing point-to-point trips and then emptied and restocked. They're designed to be going in for a refit on a regular basis. They are designed with the idea that people are going to be able to get off. They're going to be in trouble. And when you consider the more recent one, started off with a fleet of, described as more than 50, rises up to 64, reaches a peak of where 24 is roughly a third, so therefore must be roughly 72, then drops down to 35 ships. And only drops down to, well, the same number as roughly the other one did, of roughly 39,000. That's not good. That's really not good. That is really, really not good. You think about this. Think about the largest crewed ships we have in the world right now. The Gerald R4 class carries a crew in excess of 4,500 on board for months at a time. Months at a time. And probably the best example we have here of the issues you're dealing with. And that is an entirely voluntary crew who have signed up to be there and are paid to be there. Not a load of panicking civilians who didn't sign up for this, who just had their families' homes wrenched from them, their whole life position wrenched and destroyed, everything they know torn asunder, and are now stuck aboard a tin can in space, which literally if they go outside they'll die for years. They need something to do to stop them going absolute space crazy through boredom, and B, honestly, the suicide numbers, and I hate saying this considering my own views on it, are probably all low. Probably a little low. And I say this as someone who has lost far too many friends in that way. It is a trauma response. Not one I'll ever particularly understand, I have to say, due to my own experience, due to that, but it's a trauma response. It is. And they don't lose as many as they probably would do. Because if you consider what you're putting the people through, if you're not instantaneously providing them something to focus on, something to do other than sit there and think about all they've lost, you are going to be dealing with a lot of problems. A lot of problems. Now again, some of the lost ships are probably due to freighters which have been scuttled and ripped apart for spare parts. That would make sense. And some of them were lost in, of course, in enemy actions. But still, that's a big loss of ships. And every time you lose a ship, you're scrunching the people up into even smaller and smaller spaces. You're scrunching them up into even less and less time and space. And I know in the original series they did occasionally have people wandering around between the ships, and they'd had the sort of vessels doing almost a bus-like service between the ships. And that would be a good thing. That would be a highly necessary thing. Because if you can't go outside, being able to move between the different ships is going to be as good as it is. And things like this, botanical cruiser. Being able to go for a walk in a park. Yes, theoretically that land should all be being used for productive farming and agriculture, but if you're being sensible for the psychology of the people involved, you're probably going to need to have some of it being park facilities. Probably. Maybe you can plant a lot of fruit trees and herbs and things in the park facility space to make it so it sort of just about provides enough niche capability in terms of agricultural production that you can justify it without being completely annoyed. But you're going to have to do something, and that's as long as you have the seeds and the saplings to be able to start all that off. And please note, I said calories. I wasn't being as cruel as I could be in this situation, because I could be talking about the dietary needs of protein, carbohydrates, various vitamins and minerals that everyone needs daily. Let alone people doing high pressure jobs, like, I don't know, fighter pilot. Pretty much, I think you've already got the experience that there is a lot of hand-wavium going on here. There is a lot of hand-wavium going on here to make this all work. And that's before we even got to the medical needs. Okay. So, if ever there is a force or a position which needs a Starfleet-type medical organisation to show up, i.e. seemingly to have an endless supply of counsellors, not just medics, but counsellors, it is this evacuation fleet. Okay? It is. Any other particular franchise would be overwhelmed. Don't ask the rebels in Star Wars to help, they do not have enough medical team. Do not ask the Stargate's team to help. They will look at you and go, do you want to stay in Atlantis for a holiday? That's about the limit of what we can provide. We can provide shelter for all of you there. That's the interesting thing. Atlantis could take all these people in one ship, and would probably still be better to accommodate them than the ships they're in, but we'll leave that to one side. Wormhole drive will be really helpful about now, we'll leave that though. Benefits of it being a city ship. It's designed to be a city. It's actually designed to accommodate this kind of things. It's got its own issues. Trust me, it would not be a complete and utter free ride, but it would be just a tad easier as a city ship. But then you have to remember just how massive the Stargate Atlantis is. How massive the Atlantis is. But, yeah, they're hospital ships. Okay. The original series actually didn't include one. Pretty much the Battlestar herself, Galactica, was the hospital ship. They have an orphan ship and a prison ship, though. Prison barge. Got prison bear there. Not sure why. For some reason the G's gone. Sometimes these things just exist to wind you up, I swear. Now, the prison barge? The orphan ship? Really? This was someone's bright idea. Let's stick all the unclaimed orphans on a single ship together. That is certainly someone who's looking for efficiency of care, but not sensible care of their psychology, because that's ripping those kids from everything. Your best bet is to try and get them, A, accommodated with families in other ships, and if you can't do that, find people from their similar planets where they came from, etc. things, and get them with them. Try and look after them. Do not stick it and make an orphan ship. If you make an orphan ship, you are asking for issues. Yes, there are going to be problems with some of the families. Yes, there are going to be issues with some of the families. But an orphan ship is basically a backdoor to there being constant problems. Because suddenly you have a ship which is full of kids. So where do you place it? Because that's everyone's future. That's those little kids. They're orphans. You suddenly got an extra ship, which is pretty much a capital ship in terms of value you have to protect, but cannot do anything to protect itself. You've got a ship with, you've got to be very careful about who's aboard it, because there are a load of orphans who don't have anyone else to stand up for themselves. And they're all concentrated in one place, which means there's all these targets for the worst of humanity. And they're in a population of 50,000, I'm sorry, there are going to be some of the worst of the humanities to survive. It's just the law of large numbers. And I'm not even talking about sex stuff. I'm talking about exploitation. If you consider all the stories we have in our past of criminal enterprises which are exploiting children to use them as pickpockets and all those things. No, you don't want that running around in space. Not when you're dealing with all the other issues. It's far easier if the kids are more spread out, because then if there is a problem, it's localized to a few children, not a huge number of children. You have to do it as something more sensible. Prison barge. Now here is your problem, because some of them may well deserve to still be in there. And the view of me, which is you go through, and some the ones who basically go, right then, your crime wasn't that bad, frankly, we've got too much problems going on, you're back into society. And the ones whose crime was, freaking terrible, and frankly they should never be allowed back into society, turf them out the airlock is not really a practical option. As much as I would like to say it, I know that's morally, ethically not right to turf them out the airlock. But the trouble is, it's also a prison barge, which means it's another ship you've got to keep going, keep protecting, and you're literally keeping this population separate from the rest of the population because of the risk they pose to your existing population. What do you do? What do you do? Honestly, I don't know. Make a penal battalion on Galactica? Have them there? Use them, do you really want to arm them and use them as a infantry battalion? That's probably what you do with the middle of the road cases. The ones who you're not sure about putting back into civilian population, but who you don't want to turf out the airlock. I don't know. You shouldn't turf them out the airlock, though. That's bad. You might want to do it, and please note that's what I'm saying. Want to, wouldn't, though. There's a difference. This is a great thing about being a human. You can have multiple thoughts in your head. You can want to do something, and you can choose not to do it. You know? We all have this ability. But the hospital ships, they're the worst here, because hospital ships in terms of space are going to be disaster relief ships. Which means they're going to have a lot of capabilities for disaster relief. But as anyone who's ever looked in an accident emergency department, and then looked at the ongoing care departments in a hospital, will tell you, they are very different organizations and very different structures. One is built to deal with the right this minute. One is built to deal with ongoing healthcare. Basically, one is built to deal with when the other one either cannot get involved or hasn't been got involved in early enough. So whilst they can deal with, theoretically, all your problems and all your trauma needs, they can't deal with your long-term care needs, i.e. counselling, i.e. the therapy issues which are going to come up. And before anyone starts on the therapy issues going, they wouldn't have them. Let's think about the sheer amount of trauma you're dealing with. The sheer amount of trauma. The orphans, for starters, are probably going to need some form of therapy, i.e. someone to go and talk to, who's good at listening and good at talking, and you're basically going to be paying them to listen and talk. Which does sound like a dream job. But no. You know, it's going to be dealing with a lot of issues, a lot of ongoing issues. Again, A&E units, well, dialysis, that's an ongoing issue. People needing things like transplants, etc., all these long-term issues. And you're going to have this crop up. Because you've got a mixed population who have just been through significant trauma. And if anything tends to accelerate the influences of these issues, it is significant trauma. With all that being said, and remembering the question, let's first go to the shameless book plug. So, shameless book plug time. The time when I get to say thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, supporting the channel, helping it grow, all that stuff. That's wonderful. But also the time where I get to go shamelessly, book on destroyers. It's a cool book. More books coming soon. Very soon, hopefully. Hopefully, he says. Oh, will this house move ever be done? Will there be ever be finished? We'll see. Hopefully when this video comes out, and I do say this hopefully when this video comes out, because it is very much on the hopeful scale of things. We don't know. I'll be heading off to Japan, because this video is supposed to come out on the 27th of September. And if things have gone to plan, and if the money's come through and everything's been sorted out, then I will have actually left already. I will hopefully be in Tokyo. At somewhere called a Grand Prince Hotel, I think it is. I'm not sure. I know we're staying at a Grand Prince Hotel at least one of the stays. I thought, we've got a Grand Prince Hotel? Okay. There's no Grand King Hotel for us to stay in? No, seriously. Finding hotels which are equidistant to museums and are 3 stars and above, so they have... It's going to sound strange. We find hotels below that don't tend to have the security requirements we require for leaving all the computers and drones and cameras behind while we go out to dinner. And we really don't want to have those with us when we go out to dinner, because that makes them even more exposed. So, yeah, it's a suitably spaced 3-star hotel as far as I know. But, no, it should all be fun. Thank you very much, everyone, for all your support and all your kindness, and for making it all possible. And hopefully I'm already out there. Hopefully, he says. That leads us to the thank goodness for mining ship. You see, the only civilian ships which are probably set up for long-term living are the mining ships, because let's look at the economics of it. The mining ships, they want to stay in their mining area for a long time. You don't want them coming backwards and forwards, because that's a waste of a ship. They've got all these drilling bits, they've got all the systems on for mining going on them, and they're coordinating those operations. You want ships going backwards and forwards with ore. You'll have ore carriers bringing the water, bring whatever you're mining from asteroids back, but you won't have the mining ships going backwards and forwards. So they are designed to be long-range operations permanently at a distance from home. Yes, still supplied, with the ore ships coming back and forwards, probably brings back spare parts. But again, you're a commercial enterprise. You don't want things to be going wrong that often, because that's expensive. That's expensive. You don't want that. So, realistically, the only problem with them is that they are, whilst they are designed for long-term life living, they're not going to be designed for that many crew. They're mostly going to be taken up with things which they need in ore storage facilities. But they are going to be really useful for getting ore. Then you're going to need ore processing facilities. Now, it's unlikely the mining ships do much of the processing themselves, because, let's be honest, what you want the ore is in its raw state, so you can then make it into whatever particular version of material you will need from it. So again, it's going to be interesting. Realistically though, this is the problem for this whole fleet. It's once you start going, oh, we're going to do it over 4 years, we're going to do it over this, we're going to have all these complications. To be honest, the earlier version is more realistic when you've got a couple of 100 ships. Although the fact that they had 3 aggro ships and then lost them is quite disturbing. Agricultural ships are going to be an essential thing. Because agricultural ships are not just going to be about food production, they're also going to be where you're going to be producing most of your bonus oxygen. And where you can take a lot of your carbon dioxide and shove it in there and turn it into oxygen. Sewage, all these things are going to be critical things to be dealt with, because if you don't deal with your sewage, if you aren't able to sort out, you can get methane buildup, you can get all sorts of problems. And all these ships with their systems, even the ones which do have systems which are able to deal with the sewage aboard and provide water, they're going to need to be taken off the line occasionally for maintenance, which means you're going to need more of the stuff available to cover for when they're needing maintenance, because they usually take their maintenance in a docking facility where they get the supplies from the station, presumably. This is a problem. This is a big problem. So ultimately, we're left with a little scenario for the question. That's just a small scenario. How realistic are the logistics and leadership challenges of the refugee fleet in Battlestar Galactica? Now, I focused mostly on the logistics issues. The leadership ones, well, let's be honest, most of them are for the context of the time, and they are done up, and there's this scenario which happens, and this scenario which happens, and it's all for the storytelling. Because the story really is, in both diseases, it's about the leadership, and it's about leadership decisions. The one part which isn't true to leadership decisions and sort of realistic is the fact that 90% of their meetings would be about these issues. 90% of their issues, their meetings will be about getting enough food, organising things properly. And ultimately it's going to be this, which is going to be the thing it's going to come back to. Apples. I've done a few takes. Now, an apple here is a lovely thing to have. But as a food source and calorie source, it's incredibly inefficient when you're talking about a spaceship. It takes up vertical space, and it takes up horizontal space. And it provides the ability, I suppose, with some modification for an ongoing crop. But it's usually seasonal. It provides a huge amount of crop at certain times of the year. Nothing at others. It's affected by radiation. And you have to store that crop. You're starting to see, hopefully, the issues we're talking about with this particular system. Realistically, the agro ships will need to be growing crops which will be continual harvest. Things which, as long as they are supplied with the right amount of nutrients, can be continually harvested. In some regards, they are probably closer to hydroponics than terrestrial agriculture. And that's going to add on to the water requirements. Ultimately, I've always loved this story. I've always loved the story of Battlestar Galactica. I've always loved the stuff around it, the interesting take on the future, the fact that things can be muddled, the fact that things can be complicated, that there can be more than one way to see things. And the fact it showed humans being humans. But the logistics, nowhere near as obsessed with food as it needs to be. Nowhere near. In fact, the fact that they are not talking about mining, asteroids and food production in almost every single episode shows that frankly they decided that they were just going to hand wave that. Use the power of television to hand wave it. Which is not a bad thing to do. Let's be honest, it been get incredibly boring for people watching to be hearing another round of, well, have we got enough phosphate? Have we got enough, other materials necessary for the for all these plants we're growing in the agri world? And how are the cows doing? You notice they never talked about milk. They have ice cream, but they never talk about milk production. They have ice cream, but they never talk about milk production. So that being said, I always finish these videos with a question. And I'm not going to change now, although this video is not going to go on for much longer. But it's a simple question, realistically. Think about all that I've said. I'm thinking about the fact that the probability is the ships you need are going to be very, very rare. Very, very rare. How lucky were they? How lucky is the scripting? How much plot armor is there that they actually get the ships, some of the ships they do need on these trips? And also, thinking about this from a planetary evacuation perspective. If you're designing ships for planetary evacuation, realistically, it's the Battlestar Galactica conundrums you start having to look at. What do you deal with it? How do you deal with it? What do you think about? For me, all the ships would probably be the size of the Battlestar herself. but would have to have hydroponics gardens added on. A lot of them. And all the ships in the group would have to be the same sort of ships. They'd have to carry their own fighters, because you realistically want to keep the enemy as far away from your ships as you possibly can, because damage to those ships is going to be a problem. This is one of the things I liked about Battlestar Galactica. It was realistic in that way. It's a case of, we don't want the big things, which are technically our lifeboats, to get damaged. So fighters are employed to keep the enemy as far away from those big ships as possible. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Realistically, you're also probably looking at about a third of the ship's internal volume will be taken up by life support systems to supply enough water, supply enough food, supply enough water, supply enough everything else. They're going to have to be dealing with humongous stores of them. And you're probably going to have every ship have some sort of mining shuttle on it, which literally exists to go and gather water from any asteroid or anything else. But what do you think? How would you design your ships? There's the other option. You go for a wormhole drive like Stargate Atlantis. That makes a lot of sense, but you know, can't always have a friendly wormhole drive when you need one that can literally take you from point A to point B without you having to do a long 4-year journey in between. Anyway, what have we got coming up? Well, this comes out on, I think, the 27th of September, so Collingwood after Trafalgar. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. And if you like the videos, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And yeah, this was an interesting video to look at. I didn't pick out any specific leaders. I know I didn't do a leadership analysis, but that's because the moment you started looking at logistics, they just dominated it for me. Because they would have become... Realistically, one of the most important people in the fleet should have been the captains of the aggro ships and the supply ships. They should have been at every single briefing. One of them should probably have been appointed agricultural minister in charge of harvesting. They would have been the most powerful person in that fleet after the military commander, because they literally do the supply of food and supply of oxygen. Just, yeah. And then the mining commanders as well should have been there for similar reasons. But they weren't. They weren't. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, and hope you enjoyed.